reporting to us from Harare. And gentlemen, as you can see, and by the way, let me just reintroduce our guests to you if you're just tuning in today. Dr. David Munai is a well-known political writer, commentator and analyst, and Zimbabwean human rights lawyer Tino Chinyoka. To both of you gentlemen, thank you very much for staying on. I want to come back to you if I can. Tula Sizwe, I think, asked a very important question before things started just getting a little hairy there, putting a question to one of the people on the streets, the spontaneous protest that has been happening throughout the course of the day, and he asked him the important question: what does it feel like in his heart? As a Zimbabwean yourself, maybe you could also articulate your views for us today.
It's amazing how much I feel in agreement with the young man that was speaking, given our differences in age. I feel a lot of joy today. The kind of joy that I've said before, I felt in 1980 when we got independence. I think that this promises to be a day that we will remember as a day on which we rediscovered ourselves as Zimbabweans. And as that interviewee said, there's a lot of things that in our drive to find anything that could give us a living, we didn't realize how much damage had been done to us as a people. Robert Mugabe had divided us. We were turning at each other, looking at each other as a potential rival for whatever scraps we might get. And today you feel this feeling that we are all Zimbabweans. It means something. So today represents for me a promise that we will discover what it means to be Zimbabwean. That is not a form of a description of workers and servants, but a description of people with pride for their country, and with something that we can look forward to and say, this is our home, this is who we are.
Are you feeling like a younger man today?
Very much so. Very much so.
David, when you hear that kind of sentiment so heartfeltly expressed, and obviously a sentiment that so many other people in Zimbabwe are feeling today, give us the reading of the mood, if you can.
I think the mood is quite clear. People are happy and joyous, as we can see. However, let us not forget that the greatest threat to Zimbabwe, other than Mugabe, is the question of an ailing economy. Zimbabwe chose to go for a short-term gain and long-term pain in terms of how, since 1980, they've managed their own economy. They lost control of the economy, they mismanaged the land distribution, and further on, questions of corruption as far back as mid-80s. You could see what is happening right here in South Africa. It's a crisis of a nationalist movement that has lost its course, and therefore there is a need to pull back and really think, I think for Zimbabweans to realize that the Zimbabweans are going to liberate themselves. Words of President Robert Mugabe himself in 1980. And they're only going to do that if they're in control of the economy and good politics. So those elements have been lacking.
And therein lies a very salutary tale, because in spite of the jubilation and celebration that we're seeing on the streets of Harare at the moment, ahead is the most enormous task: to rebuild a country, to rebuild an economy, but also, to Tino's point that he was making a little earlier, and it's the brother mistrusting brother, which is also critical that mistrust is overcome. This is the beginning, but goodness gracious, there's a lot still ahead. Yeah,
there's more needed. South Africa remains the largest investor in Zimbabwe. China is right there. The US and all other Western powers. I think there is also a need for goodwill from the international community to assist the change as Zimbabweans pave a new way in terms of dealing with their internal issues, and realize that the economy is the key issues, and more investment, stabilized movement of people, education, renegotiate on the question of land distribution, bring in the former colonial power. If there's a need of compensating former white farmers, why not? lifting of sanctions. There are sanctions applied by London as well as Washington, and ensure that the Zimbabwe economy retake its position, because Zimbabwe is a missing gap in the entire region. If you look at the economies, it was the largest, second largest economy after South Africa, and you really need a Zimbabwean economy that is strong for the entire continent. And without that, we're going to see the spilling over of all that crisis right here. And there should also be a lesson for ANC as it leads to its own Congress in December. All what is happening on the streets of Harare, chances are high, if ANC does not change course, it will be happening here in no time.
I want to come back to ZANU-PF, Tino, if we can. In the last news sweep, we were talking about the importance of ZANU-PF itself rebranding, regrouping, redeveloping itself, reinventing itself. It's all very well to get rid of the head, and the end, I think there's common concordance that Robert Mugabe is on his way out, whether it happens today, tomorrow, or on Monday. But within the party itself, there is also still the deep rot of corruption. There's that mistrust that you spoke about, and a lot of patronage, a lot of ineptitude, which also needs to change. That's going to be the next phase, but it's also going to be incredibly difficult to do that.
I think so, yes. When something like this happens, I think the rest of the world needs to give us this moment to be joyful. But I don't think that anyone who is in control of this situation, and a large number of Zimbabweans, are under any illusions that this is going to be easy. And more so in ZANU-PF, I'm sure they looking would be saying this kind of pent-up anger, which one would have to hope that they were not aware of, because otherwise, if they were, then they're just callous, shows that the people of Zimbabwe have suffered and are very unlikely to go back and allow this kind of thing to happen again. So this coming few weeks, months, if they go through this moment of re-examining themselves, they ought to be looking at rebranding themselves. The number of people you are seeing in the streets are people who are, majority of them, born after 1980. Speaking to them about what we did in the War of Independence has no resonance with them. This has nothing to do with them.
2 generations on, isn't it?
Exactly. What they want is a Zimbabwe that they can be proud of. And that is not a Zimbabwe that's liberated from Ian Smith, but it's a Zimbabwe that is good for them, that is good for their family. So ZANU-PF needs to find programs that are going to speak to those people on the streets and say, okay, we have allowed this man to do what he has done, but we have a plan for how to take this forward. And that plan, in my view, is that it ought, at this initial stage, to include everybody. So the one thing that, although the army is in control, ZANU-PF is in control at the moment, what they can't do is to think that next week Mugabe goes, it's business as usual, ZANU-PF in control. They absolutely have to include other Zimbabweans.
Do you believe that ZANU-PF, or what will remain of ZANU-PF, gets that they understand that?
I have hope that they do. When you look at some of the statements, which are very few, unfortunately, coming out, there seems to be a feeling that we are doing this for the country. And if we are doing this for the country, then that should include realizing that for the country to do well, you can't have intelligent people like Atham Tambara, like Tendai Biti, like Welshman Ngube, and courageous people like Morgan Tsvangirai on the sidelines, not putting an input into how the country is fixed, because otherwise we end up where we are now.
So, David Munyai, that argument is predicated on those key members of opposition parties, some larger than others, also stepping up to the plate, one demanding rightful representation in this process, but also making sure that they're not seen to be politically greedy.
Indeed. I think